Welcome, my sunshines, to your session. I am so excited to be here with you again. How are you? Today, we're going to talk about something that I think is really, really key for feeling good, and that's emotional regulation. So, emotional regulation is important because it's foundational to everything else that happens in our day. How we feel is how our day goes. So, before we get started, I want to thank everybody. We had a lot of great enthusiasm for the first two episodes. This is episode 3. And we had people listening and watching from all over the world. So, shout out to my California people. And I hope everyone is safe out there and all of our East Coast people. And even someone in the middle of the Indian Ocean was listening. So if you are listening, give us a shout and let us know who you are because we are very grateful. So also, we want to let you know we gave out our 3 books to our winners from our first session, and that was Alex, Morgan, and Michelle. So thank you guys for giving feedback, and we welcome that anytime you want to pop up on our pages and give us feedback or ideas about an episode. We're glad to hear it. So I'm glad you're here for this today because I have a feeling you might need this. We have a lot going on in the world right now. We have a lot going on in our lives. We all do. And how we feel about it drives us through the day. So I want you to think about your feelings. And that's why we're here. I'm going to teach you a different way to think about your feelings because our feelings are so much a part of the burden that we feel when we're overwhelmed or tired or just done, right? That's our feelings. So the way that you feel rules how your day goes. So this is an important conversation. So I want you to realize life is a bunch of opposing systems hitting you all the time. Do this, do that. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. All those opposing systems, and you're trying to find balance and you're trying to be okay where you are. And that's where emotional regulation comes in. How much power do you have to control the things that you feel? And some people say, no, it's just what I feel. Well, there's some thoughts in there too. So we're going to think about emotions differently today. And I want to start by telling you that your emotions are signals. They are important signals that you need to listen to because those signals tell you what's going on. And sometimes they're signals to other people, and sometimes they're always signals to you. Think about a baby. When a baby is sad, a baby cries. A baby is signaling you outwardly their emotion. I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need my diaper changed, right? So you have your own outward signals of emotions to other people. But most importantly, it's the ones that it's sending inward, those signals that I want you really thinking about. When you are in a dark place walking at night and you get that feeling of I might not be safe, you behave differently. So your feeling told you, be careful. That's an example, a very clear example of why listening to emotions is important, right? If you're around someone that every time you're around them, they make you feel really good, that's a signal. That's saying, I need more people like this in my life, or I need to build this relationship and work on it. But also, the other side is if you're around someone who makes you feel very bad, I want you to pay attention to that because people call that intuition. But I also think it's just a feeling that's coming at you and saying, pay attention. This might not be safe for you. Just like walking in the dark at night. It's the same kind of feeling, but it's one that you may listen to more in that alley than you do with a person. So I want you to think about your feelings as informants and as valid and as sometimes not so valid informants. So we're going to explore all that. How do you know the difference between when a feeling is a good thing and informing us or when a feeling is a bad thing that is actually hurting us to hold on to? So we're going to explore that today. If you remember in one of our other sessions, we talked about that thought, feeling, behavior loop, that everything comes in those threes. You have a thought, you get a feeling, and then you have a behavior. And then you get a thought and a feeling and a behavior. And that loop goes on and on and on. And what we want to do is put more space between each thing in that loop. When you think, and then you feel, and then you act. If we do all those in a row without separating them out, we're acting in ways that might not be the best way for us. So your feelings are telling you something needs attention. Well, guess what? Something always needs attention. And I want you to begin to think about that there is no time when it's all going to be peaceful and happy for decades. That's not how it really works. So you have to be ready to manage the feelings and manage the things that come at you, because they're always going to. They're not always going to be huge and unbearable, but they are always going to come at you. Marcus Aurelius said, "The whole universe is change, and life itself is but what you deem it." I'm going to say it again. Marcus Aurelius was a smart guy. The whole universe is change, and life itself is but what you deem it. So good old Marcus Aurelius is saying you got to roll with it. He's saying that there's always going to be something, and that there's always change. And if you resist it or you make it terrifying, then that's what it's going to be for you. There are a lot of people that I treat in my practice that have not learned to roll with it and have had negative feelings or difficult changes, and they don't have the ability to regulate themselves out of it. Poor emotional regulation ends often in anxiety and depression. And a really strong example of that is when you have a negative thing happen or a negative thought comes and it stays too long, it can roll you into a very depressive episode. A lot of people will tell you depression is basically a rumination that's stuck, a negative thought pattern that you stayed on too long and that it poisoned you. And I've seen this over and over again. And then once you're in it that deep, it's very hard to get out. So it's much easier to regulate your emotions day to day than to allow yourself to fall into patterns that will hurt you. And I'll give you an example. There was a person I treated years ago, and he was bound to his bed. Now, this was a young person. This was not an older person, and bound to his bed for years, and didn't go out, and had someone else caretake him. And there was really nothing physically wrong with him other than depression. Now, when you're in depression long enough, you get things physically wrong with you. Your mobility can decrease. You don't take care of yourself. But this person had decided that the world was so terrible that he didn't want to feel it. So he shut it out, didn't go out, didn't leave his room. And what happened was the lack of feeling, the lack of tolerating emotions turned into a complete intolerance of all things that he could feel. And that's the opposite of what we want. I want you to feel the full spectrum of emotions. I want you to feel the happy and the sad, because I want you to know that those things are not going to kill you. They're not going to hurt you. They don't have to be avoided at a high level. But in this case, the only healing that I could give him was to get him to start feeling things again. And what we did is we worked on every day. There were these things he had to do. He had to get out of bed a few times a day. He had to move for 5 minutes. He had to eat something green. He had to go outside for a minute. And eventually we built up this list of 13 things that he had to do every day. And every one of them was about feeling something. Now, it might have started out with you're going to stick your head outside today for a second. And then it ends up with you're going to go out with a friend. But really the cure for depression for him was about feeling things again and learning that he could survive that and that he'd be okay. So I don't want you to develop a fear of your feelings, because a fear of your feelings at a high level over time can end up being something really terrible where you don't want to feel anything at all. One of the interesting first things to go sometimes when people are depressed is their own hygiene, the shower. And I really thought about that for a lot of years. I thought, why are depressed people never wanting to wash themselves or get in the shower, right? That's a normal thing. And then I realized what it was. was that the shower is this massive sensory onslaught. You have to be cold and you have to be naked and then you have to be wet and then you have to be hot and then you have to touch all the soaps and then you have to dry yourself off and then you have to pick out clothes and get dressed. That's a very normal part of our day until feeling things become so hard that you don't want to feel any of those things. And that's why that goes away. So what I'm telling you is I want you to embrace the fact that life is change and that things are going to make you feel things. But I want you to make sure that you are not looking at that as a bad thing or believing that you're going to be stuck in a feeling forever. The latest statistics on anxiety say that if you did a survey that you could ask 100 people if they were severely anxious last week, and 19 of them would say yes. 19% of people were severely anxious last week. I think it's higher than that. I always think the statistics are underreported because people don't like to talk about their mental health. But what is anxiousness but fear? And what are we afraid of? We're afraid of something bad is going to happen. We're afraid that we're going to have to feel something. We're afraid that we're going to have to encounter something. And we believe at some level that those things are going to be intolerable for us. So why do we learn to believe that we can't feel our feelings? Why do we learn that certain feelings are bad? The problem is that anxiety shows up in a lot of weird places. So a lot of people don't recognize that they're anxious or that they're avoiding a feeling. They just end up thinking something bad about themselves. And I'll give you an example. Avoidant behavior. I don't like to do that anymore. I don't go to the store because it's uncomfortable for me, so I order my food online. Or I'm not going to that party because it's going to be weird for me. Avoidant behavior is I don't want to be uncomfortable, so I'm not going to participate. And at some level, sure, order your groceries if that makes your life easier. But don't do it because you have a fear, right? Think about that fear. So the other behavior that comes about, and this is a surprise to a lot of people, is procrastination. Do you know that procrastination is anxiety? It's fear of doing something, fear of the discomfort of doing something. And in that fear, we end up creating more anxiety. And I always think about grad school and how I would have these assignments and I would put them off for 2 weeks and I'd do them right on the end of the due date. And for 2 weeks, I'd agonize and feel terrible about it. And why aren't I doing it? And I could just do it. And then when I finally went to do it, it was 45 minutes of my life. And I thought, why on earth didn't I just do this in the first place? And the reason was I had anxiety about it. I was anxious that I wouldn't do it right or that I wouldn't be able to figure it out. And I figured out assignment after assignment, but that was just some fear or false belief that discomfort would be present. So think about how anxiety might show up for you and what emotions you might be avoiding. So we all have certain emotions we avoid. And I want you to really think about this. What is the last thing that you felt that made you so uncomfortable and you don't want to feel it again? Now, there are some easy ones, things like rejection, abandonment, shame, maybe feeling not smart enough, maybe feeling dumb, right? There are so many emotions that we all have that we don't like. But every one of us probably has one or two that are bigger for us based on our experiences. And sometimes you don't know what they are, but you know it when it's triggered. You know it when you experience it. And I'll give you an example. I had someone that I saw, and he uh, was a successful 40 something person in a good job. And he came to me because he was having stress at work. This was a person who loved his job, who was really good at his job, but he couldn't understand why suddenly he just wanted to leave. He wanted to quit. And his partner had sent him to me and said, he says I can't quit. He says I can't leave, so I have to figure it out. So I'm here in therapy to figure it out. Well, we started to talk about what he was feeling, and he described this sort of boys' club at work and these people that were really mean to him, and that they knew that he had a husband and they were saying little snide things, and they were being mean, really awful things that you wouldn't think people can get away with now, but they still try. And I started to say, well, that's humiliating, right? And he went, yeah, that's what I feel. That's the word, humiliated. So we talked about how that was a terrible thing to feel. And all of a sudden, something came across his face, and I saw there was a revelation, a realization. And he talked about how when he was in middle school, that he had been bullied by children in middle school, and how humiliating it was, and how nobody did anything about it. So he had to sit in that humiliation, and he had to endure it without any relief or anybody telling him that that was a normal way to feel and that they could help him. His parents blew it off, his teachers blew it off, and it went on for a very long time. So he had this innate fear and innate connection to humiliation because he endured it for months and months and nobody helped him. So the humiliation was the thing that he was feeling again, and it connected to helplessness. So instead of feeling like he could do anything, he went back to that old experience of that feeling and felt very helpless. When in fact, there was a lot he could do. And we did. We walked through the HR processes together, and we walked into how do you walk back in a place with your head held high? Is it important to stay? Is it important to leave? But all of that was a lot easier once he identified why it was so uncomfortable to him. So he learned that humiliation was something he was especially susceptible to and especially could be derailed by. I bet you have something in you that you avoid. There's a feeling that you felt at one point that you never want to feel again. And when that feeling pops up, that's what a trigger is. A trigger is not the things that you hear people saying, oh, that movie, that scary scene, it triggered me. No, a trigger is where something pops up for you and it hits something so deep inside of you, and you react and you don't even realize what you're doing or saying because that emotion is very painful for you. There's a theory in psychology about having core fears, that all of us have a core fear inside of us, and that core fear drives how we regulate our emotions. And I really like this theory. I think it works when you think about most people I work with that have problems that come in are operating from a fear of something and need help to change. So what I try to do is identify, what is that fear that you have? And a very common one, some of the common ones, let's give a few of them, are not being good enough, not being smart enough. But a big one is abandonment, rejection. A lot of people have different fears based on their life experiences. And I'll give you an example. I had someone who was adopted, and she was adopted at a very advanced age. She wasn't a baby, and had a lot of fears of abandonment, and was a very happy, great job, good relationship. On the surface, one of those people you'd look at and say, she has it all together. She did. But she started having problems in her marriage and started having problems with her husband and started treating him very, very badly, and came to therapy to understand why she was doing that and to try to stop. And what we realized was as soon as the marriage wasn't perfect and it was problematic, she had the urge to run. And we looked at that as her extreme fear of abandonment. Her behavior, her negative behavior with him was that he wasn't going to abandon her. She was going to be the one that got out. But that fear can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. You could fear something so badly that you cause it to happen. And that's what we realized, was that she was so afraid of being left again that she had a lot of behavior that was her marching out the door first. And that wasn't at all what she wanted. So I want you to think about, do you have a core fear? Do you have something in you that you're afraid of or afraid of feeling. And if you can identify that, you might understand yourself a little better in how you have emotions and how you react. There's a there's a feeling in our emotional regulation sometimes that feels so intense that we need to escape, whatever that feeling is. And we all have a different button for that. But if that feeling is so intolerable, exhaustion, overwhelmed, loneliness, that you need to escape, I would say that's normal at some level, right? On a Friday after work, we're pretty exhausted. We need to escape. So we do whatever it is we need to escape. We have a drink, we go out with friends, we sit on the couch. All that's okay. But it's the level of that escape that indicates how well you're managing your emotions. So if you're having 10 glasses of wine on every Friday night because your week was so bad, that level of escape is too high for you. If you are lonely and you're doing things in a self-destructive way to connect to people, that level's too high. Escape is pleasure seeking. And there's an interesting idea about the difference between pleasure and joy. Pleasure is something outside of you that you use to make yourself feel better. There's nothing wrong with that. That it's good to have pleasure. We want pleasure. Why are we here if we don't get to feel good things? But pleasure is a dangerous game because pleasure can lead to addiction and pleasure can lead to self-soothing and escape, that the escape becomes the bigger part of your life than your actual life. That's how addiction happens. So pleasure is what you use outside of you to make yourself feel better. Joy, on the other hand, is what arises within you. You can't create joy. You can't create a feeling like that. That one rises from within you based on what you're experiencing. So as we are so busy pleasure seeking, we're missing the opportunities for joy. And joy can often come in your everyday life. So think about, where are you finding joy? It's a big question I ask people who come to me and are very overwhelmed and very sad. And I say, well, when did you last experience joy? And they don't even really understand what that is. And I want you to think about that. When did you last experience joy? When did something rise up inside of you and make you feel so good without you seeking it necessarily? Those are the telling moments for us. When you can find a moment that gives you joy, I want you to look back over it and examine why. And that joy, that emotion will tell you something about what you need more of, right? So there's a way to think about joy, and joy is a very rare emotion. We cannot expect to have joy all of the time. So that's why it's precious. But I still want you thinking about the difference between pleasure seeking and joy, because pleasure seeking can take you to joy, sure, but pleasure seeking has to be regulated. So Shakespeare said, nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So that's sort of where I want to connect the idea of thinking and emotions, is that our thoughts come first, our emotions come second. So if we are getting very bogged down in an emotion and stuck in it, we're forgetting probably to think logically about it. And that means that we end up getting trapped by an emotion. So what if you have a breakup? Breakups are terrible. They're one of the things that I see where people will come to me and start therapy after a breakup, because it so tears down sometimes our vision of who we are and our own value, and sometimes of what we had planned for the rest of our lives. So I always think it's great when people come and seek help after a breakup, because it's a great time to rebuild, to reset, and to see where we're going next. But what if you didn't get help? What if you stayed in that feeling? What if that breakup left you feeling less than? not good enough? What if somebody else was chosen over you and you view that person as better than you? Your self esteem just took a major hit. And instead of recovering and going up, you're going deeper into that feeling. Being trapped by a feeling is a very bad place to be because that feeling can become you. So instead of feeling lonely or having a moment after a breakup, you become a sad, depressed person. That's why emotional regulation is super important because we don't want to stay in any emotion too long. And we need to pull ourselves out of that emotion after we felt it and it's told us what it needed to tell us. And sometimes that discomfort is necessary. That discomfort after a breakup says, "Ooh, I got to think about not doing that again. Maybe I'll make a different choice next time, or I'll operate differently in my relationship." But we listen to it, but we don't stay in it. So, a lot of times, what happens is sometimes we stay in an emotion too long and it becomes a part of us, it becomes a part of our script. And we talked about this in another episode about self talk and how we all have these scripts that run inside of us, but some of them run very, very deeply and we aren't even aware of them. But yet they propel our emotional reactions and our behaviors. And I'll give you an example. One of the big ones that I see is this sense of being in trouble. And I want you to think about that. Do you remember when you were young and you were in trouble, right? We've all gone through it with our parents. We all did something wrong. We painted a wall. We did something wrong in the house or at school, and we were in trouble. That is one of the worst feelings, isn't it? Sitting outside the principal's office waiting to go in, waiting for your dad to come home to talk to you about what you did. The feeling of being in trouble is a very intense feeling. And I think growing up, probably all of us might have felt that at one time or another. It's part of how we learned limits and rules by being in trouble. But what happens is if you spend much of your childhood in trouble or some of your adult life in marriages or relationships in trouble, or you're around a person who makes you feel like you do things wrong all the time, that sense of being in trouble will create your emotional responses and the way that you interact with the world. So I had somebody and her mother was abusive to her, even in adulthood. And my question was, why are you still now in your 20s still allowing your mother to abuse you? You don't live there anymore. She doesn't pay for anything. You're separate from her, but you allow her to abuse you. And the reason was that her mother always made her feel like she was in trouble. She always felt like she was wrong. So she lived from that. She reacted from that. But the problem was she did it in her relationships too. She did it in her friendships. And she got so used to the idea of being uncomfortable that other people could make her uncomfortable really easily and then eventually have control and abuse her. So there's an underlying script that once she realized it and she went, whoa, I'm not in trouble right now. I live a good life. And it was still with her. So you hear people talking about the subconscious. That's a good example, is that she didn't walk around thinking about it. Never even occurred to her to think about that. But once she recognized that that was something in her, she could remind herself before she walked in the door at her mom's house, I'm not in trouble for anything. And if she treats me that way, it doesn't matter because she's wrong. Another underlying script that I see a lot of is that too much, not enough. And I'll tell you what I mean. Very often, as we're growing up, we're told by people that we're too much. We're too loud. We talk too much. We shouldn't wear what we're wearing. We're too whatever. And as a result, the message that you get is that you're not good enough. So, how can you be too much and not enough all at once? And what a terrible message to give someone. But a lot of us had parents who wanted to make us smaller, or relationships that wanted to make us smaller. And as a result, we quiet down the things about ourselves because we don't want to be too much. And think about that idea that we talked about previously about fitting in, right? If you don't fit in, and some of us just don't, and I'm thrilled with that, but when you're a child, it's not so easy. Or when you're in a marriage, it's not so easy because it's kind of insidious, it creeps up. So, understanding your emotions and where they come from can help you to identify, am I walking around feeling not good enough? And is that where my emotions come from? If you walk around not feeling good enough, it's a lot easier for somebody to put you down and ruin your day. If you walk into work and you're wearing something bright yellow and somebody at work makes a nasty comment, the way that you come back at that determines your day. Well, I like yellow, right? I'm having a great day. I feel like my best sunny self versus maybe I shouldn't have worn this. Think of the difference in those two emotions. That originates with what you believe about yourself. But once you have that emotion, it perpetuates through your day. So you walk in every room feeling like, oh, I'm too much. This yellow is too much. Versus, here I am. Look at me. This is who I am. Major difference in the way that you feel with those two different approaches. A lot of times, our emotional regulation is about self protection and trying not to feel things. But sometimes it's about self protection at too high of a level. Is that I'm going to walk around the world waiting for someone to make me feel something and tear me down. And that's really a crime, right? That you can walk out of your house feeling good and somebody else can steal from you your peace. And now, granted, there are times when that's a part of life, right? That you're going to jump into things with people and get pulled in emotionally and all of that. But you have to be able to recognize when that's happening. I think about being a therapist and how when I am in it with a person for 53 minutes, I am in those feelings with them. But as soon as they walk out the door, I have to release those feelings. Those feelings don't belong to me. And if I didn't do that over and over again, I would be going through all those feelings and carrying them around. That's an easy example to see. But how much do you do that in your life? Do you walk into a room and absorb the energy of somebody else there and it ruins your day? Oh, I have to work with her today and she's miserable, right? Well, it doesn't matter because you're not miserable and you're going to stay not miserable. And that takes a little bit of work and a little bit of effort. But how being aware of your feelings can change things is that you can realize that you might have the power to jump out of them instead of staying stuck in them too long. Emotional suffering is universal. We all suffer. You're going to be around people who have suffering. You're going to suffer. And I want you to accept that that's part of being alive, that you're going to have days where you're going to feel really crappy and you're going to have days where you feel joy. And those ups and downs are what it is to be alive. So many people come to me and go, this is the craziest thing over the years. I must be bipolar because one day I'm happy and one day I'm sad. And my answer is, okay, well, we're going to dig around in that and see. You probably aren't. Less than 1% of the population is. But let's dig around and see, why are we having these extremes in emotions? What's happening around you? Are you regulated? Or is it normal? You're having a bad day, something happens, it steals your bad day. But if that's happening relentlessly and over again, then we have to look a little deeper at the way you're regulating. But there is a natural up and down. The other thing is that suffering at a high level, feeling things like loneliness, abandonment, that's also universal. I would bet there's probably no one in your life that you could talk to that would say they've never felt what it is to be lonely. They've never felt abandoned. We all feel that, but it's how we view it that matters. There's a poem by Robert Frost, and it's a really good example of this about what loneliness feels like. And I want to share it with you. It's called Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of my feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or to say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. So Robert is saying something pretty powerful there. He's saying, I know what that feels like. And that's his description, walking alone at night. And we have to stop believing that we're the only one that ever felt this way. And it's a correction that I make to people all the time. Why is my life so hard? Why do I feel this way? Well, first of all, you're human and you're going to have a range of emotions. And those emotions are okay and they're supposed to be there. But they are supposed to be a moment. And sometimes that moment is quick and sometimes that moment's a little longer. But we have to believe that those moments are going to pass. So I'm going to teach you something today that's a way of thinking about your feelings that was very powerful to me when I learned this. And I couldn't even tell you where I got this from. It's been so many years, but I remember that it changed the way that I thought about feelings and how they're supposed to be. So I want you to think for a minute about the weather and how you feel about the weather. When you look outside and it's snowing, you don't look outside and go, it's snowing. It's never going to stop snowing. It's going to snow every day forever. And I'm so upset about it. No, you go, it's snowing. This is a pain. I got to scrape off my car. But it's okay. It'll pass, right? You don't believe that it's always going to snow. If we get a crazy hailstorm, you don't look out and go, oh, it's never going to stop hailing and I'm never going to be able to go outside again. But by the same token, when you get a sunny day, think about how that feels. You walk outside, you feel the sun on your body. Sometimes you even look up at the sky and it feels so good. But the reason it feels so good is because we know it's not like that all the time. So we allow the weather to change and we roll with it, especially here in New Jersey. We don't know what we're going to get day to day. But whatever it is, we know it'll be different in a day or so most of the time. So our feelings are like that too. But we don't really look at it that way. When we're sad and we're lonely, something in us will tell us, this evil dark voice that says, you're always going to feel this way. And if we have a really good day and the next day isn't so good, sometimes a little voice says, see, you don't get to be happy. And the truth of it is that it is supposed to be like weather. It doesn't rain all the time, but it's not sunny all the time either. And I want you to begin to look at your feelings as a type of weather that comes over you. And this is so helpful because if I'm feeling a certain way, the old me many years ago would have been, this is my life now. This is who I am. I'm miserable. Nothing ever works out for me. But the new me says, well, this is rain today. Tomorrow it's not going to be raining. And it helps me to remember that whatever I'm in is not going to stay. It doesn't. And it's hard to think about this in the moment. But once you think about this idea and you keep it close to you, it will come to you. And it will save you. It will remind you. And it will lift you out of something instead of keeping you stuck in it. So use it. Think about it. Label it if you have to. This is a hailstorm today. Or this is a really sunny day. Today I got joy, right? So you are the sky and your feelings are the weather. And they will come and they will pass over you. And sometimes they will block out the sun. But they will always pass through you. It's important to think about because that's perspective. Perspective is nothing stays, it's transient. And that's a good thing. It's a really good thing. If we were happy all the time, would we appreciate it? Not that I wish the other negatives upon you. So there's a way to use this with somebody that you love, right? If you have children, to be able to teach them this about their own feelings. If you have a partner, to be able to say, today is a hailstorm. And they'll maybe remind you, it's okay, it's temporary. But we don't want to stay in anything too long. But we also want to share what's inside of us. This is where it gets tricky for people. A lot of people don't share the range of emotions that they have because in their head they think it's wrong. Why do I feel lonely when I have all these people around me? I can't talk about that. Why do I feel so sad when I have a beautiful life? I hear that one a lot. And I should be happy. So, because of that, we don't talk about it. And the problem is, you can't always process your emotions on your own. I want you to try, and I want you to learn what we're talking about today as a way of thinking about them differently. But it's important to talk about them because what happens is when you have your feelings inside your head, they sound different inside your head than outside. Did you ever say something out loud when you're feeling something and then go, oh, I feel better? Or that sounds crazy, right? But I want you getting out the big feelings with someone. And if you don't have anybody in your life that you trust, there is always therapy. And it's a great way to start learning how to process your feelings. But start making talking about your feelings normal for you, your kids, your partner. I had somebody with a chronic illness and I had to teach her in her relationship to share every day how she was feeling because the expectations were unclear. She would have a day where she was $1,000,000. She was great, and days where she couldn't get out of bed. And it was very disconcerting to her child and to her husband because they didn't know what to expect any given day. So I said, okay, you're going to wake up and you're going to communicate how you're feeling physically and how you're feeling emotionally to your husband every day. And then everybody knows where we are. It's an extreme example. You're not always going to do that. But it changed the way that everybody felt about that illness because everybody was together in it and meeting it wherever it was that day. So if you're not talking about feelings, you have the potential for them to get kind of clogged up. And I have some theories about this. We look at men and the level of aggression in a lot of men is very different than the level of aggression in most women. Why is that? It's because men have been taught of a certain generation, maybe not so much now, but they were taught that showing emotions was weakness, that you were a pansy or whatever the derogatory term would be, but that you couldn't show emotions because you'd be perceived as less than manly. Well, what happens to all those emotions then? They try to sort them out in their own heads, and very often they come out all at once in reactive behavior or aggression. Certainly not all men, but definitely more men than women. You hear about men punching a wall. Well, why on earth did it get to the point where we're punching a wall? It's because there's so much emotion, and when they're not used to talking about it, they express it in a way that makes sense. And they have to learn. So, one of the things I love about having men in therapy is that for the first time, some of them are really being vulnerable and sharing and learning how to talk about their feelings and to label their feelings. And it changes their relationships and also changes the way they feel. So, labeling is an important part of this. How do you label your emotions? What do you call them? And how do you know what they really are? So, one of my favorites is anger, right? That's an easy one to work with because anger is never anger. So, when I see anger, I always say, what's under it? Think about that. Think about the last time you were really angry about something. Do you remember? You were angry, right? But what were you really feeling? What you were probably really feeling was disappointed or frustrated or sad. And the low hanging fruit for you was anger. A lot of people learn anger from people around them. They learn that that's appropriate. There's a lot in how we were taught emotion that shows us how to be in the world. So, the way that we learn how to be emotional and how to process our emotions is primarily from the people that raise us and the houses that we're in. So, we learn whether or not it's okay to express emotions, how to appropriately express emotions. We learn all of that from the people that live in our house with us. So if you are raised in a house where anger is normalized, then you are more prone to be angry and to realize that that's the low hanging fruit of emotions for you is a big realization, because then you got to change it. Oh, I'm angry because when I get frustrated. I have people all the time that justify their anger. Well, I was frustrated. Well, they pushed me. Okay, well, then you label it. I'm frustrated. And you work on that instead of letting it go to anger. Anger is a habit. It's a habit that we learn, and it's an easy one. It's an easy way to shut it down. If you yell at me, I'm going to listen for a minute, right? It's a form of control, but it's also a form of abuse. And I'll tell you why. That there's a reason why anger is not healthy for us, especially in our relationships. When we're born essentially with two fears. We're born with fear of heights and fear of loud noises. Those are in us. They're born in us. And they should be. They keep us alive. If I was not afraid of heights, I would not know not to take that step and look down, right? So we have to be afraid of heights. Fear of loud noises is super important, because if something's coming at us and we hear it, we can be alerted and we can react. If I'm in the middle of the road and there's a car coming, I want you to scream at me and tell me to move, because I'm going to jump. So if loud noises give us fear, then yelling gives us fear. Anger gives us fear. If I yell at you, I'm instilling fear in you at a visceral level. When you're somewhere and you hear a yell, no matter what you're doing, your head turns toward it, because that yell goes into you and gives you fear, as it should. So if we're yelled at over and over and over again, we're exercising our fear muscle way too much, and we become too vigilant and too hypervigilant. And unfortunately, a lot of us grew up that way. And not all of us go, oh, yeah, I don't want that around. We instead perpetuate it. So a lot of us did not have the best role models growing up for emotional regulation. A lot of people in older generations were taught that emotions in general didn't have a place, that you were to be seen and not heard. That's my favorite one from back in the day. And a lot of people really grew up with that. You will be seen and not heard. It's terrible. But I see a lot of people raising their children now, and they're giving their emotions all kinds of leeway, which is great too, right? We want you to be able to tell me when you're sad or tell me when you're upset. But we also have to be careful that kids' emotions aren't ruling the house either. They're allowed to have their emotions, but they're not allowed to hurt other people with them. So there's a limit there too. But I want you to examine, what did you learn about emotions and about feelings? And I would bet you, if you're not paying attention, some of the things that you learned that weren't so great are present in you now. And yelling is a big one. I have people that come to me and say, I'm yelling at my children and I don't like it. My mother yelled at me. And it's actually one of those things that's pretty easy to remedy. And when that's happened, we usually make it stop. Because the second that you become aware that your emotions are manifesting the wrong way is when we can start changing them. So I want to teach you a little strategy to change them. And one of my favorite strategies is thinking about automatic thoughts. This one will blow your mind once you start doing this. This is a great one. We all have automatic thoughts. all those things that are in us that we've talked about come out automatically, right? Some people yell automatically, they're angry automatically, they withdraw automatically. But our first feeling is not always correct. And I want you to think about that. Your first feeling is not always correct. And sometimes, if you wait just a few seconds, the second thought that comes is more accurate. How many times do you blurt something out and then go, oh, wait, I didn't mean that. Let me think about that for a second. I've read research that says in 14 seconds, and alternately in 40 seconds, depends on who you read, that you can completely change what it was you were going to say if you just pause for 14 seconds. And in that 14 seconds, you can formulate a more logical response and a less emotionally driven response. So, what if somebody said something to you and instead of blurting back, you took 14 seconds, which is very quick? That's a deep breath. That's taking off your glasses and cleaning them. That's putting up your finger and saying, give me a sec. In 14 seconds, you could formulate a more accurate response because our first thought is all emotion and self-protection, maybe. And our second thought is where our logic starts to seep in. So that's going to be some homework. I want you thinking about your automatic thoughts, what they contain. And are you waiting for that second, more logical thought to come before you react or express? It's a fun thing to learn. So one of the things we talked about today was a little bit about trauma and emotions, about how we're taught some of the wrong things by the trauma that happens to us. So my book recommendation is actually going to be a book about trauma. And the book is called The Body Keeps Score. You've probably heard this one. This is a very popular one, but it's definitely worth mentioning. Bessel van der Kolk is the author, and he talks about how trauma shapes us in ways that we don't always see or understand. And one of the ways it shapes us is our emotions and the way we process them. So if you've had trauma, which most of us have had some level of trauma, it might be really wise to examine the role of that in your mental health and in the way you process emotions. So that book is a real good start because he also talks about how we can heal from it, that we don't have to stay in that space. So what are our takeaways today? That I want you to think about your emotions differently. I want you to realize that your emotions are signaling you and telling you something that you need to listen to. But I also want you to realize that they're always going to be speaking and telling you things, that your emotions are always going to go up and down, and that you have to learn that that's not bad, and we don't have to avoid certain parts of those emotions, that we'll survive it, that if we're lonely, maybe it's only a day. If we're sad, maybe it's only rain, right? So our weather metaphor. If you were sad, it's rain and it will pass. We're also going to work on our automatic thoughts. We're not going to go with the first thing we think about. We're going to take a pause and we're going to find that second thought that's not pure emotion and maybe has some logic in it. So that's our episode for today. I hope that you learned some things that you can think about. And next time in our next episode, it's going to be a saucy one. Very excited. We're going to talk about relationships and we're going to talk about how we improve connection in our relationships. So make sure you give that one a listen. So thank you, my sunshines, for being here, for watering your seeds so that we can grow. And I want to remind you that change isn't always easy. It's not always comfortable, but it is possible. So until next time, let's hope for lots of sunny days and some joy. Bye.